commercial real estate. You make your money when you buy. You
That's
you
right.
make money because you buy the right asset at the right time in the right market.
Welcome to The Keys to Your Legacy with your host, Elijah Keys.
So Carol Ann Flint, how are you today?
Hi.
So nice to see you. I know that most people who had tuned into the podcast might not know who you are, but you are an outstanding real estate broker, correct, or agent?
In California, I'm an agent.
Agent. But in New York, you're a broker because you're originally from New York.
Yeah, I'm a broker there.
What made the transition from you to New York, from New York to California?
I have family on the West Coast and no family on the East Coast. And I had been
Mhm.
in the concrete jungle for 25 years. And the company I was working for bought a bunch of companies out here on the West Coast.
Oh,
And it just seemed like a way to pivot out of New York City and move to a place with a little slower pace.
yeah. So you moved to Silicon Valley. That's slower
Yes.
pace than New York City.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why commercial? I mean, we've had a couple of real estate agents on the podcast, but they're all residential. And so why commercial? And what's the difference? What's the difference between commercial and residential real estate?
Absolutely. They are very different.
Mm.
For most people, the home they own that they live in is the largest asset they have. For people who invest in income producing real estate, they look at it as if it's an asset. There's no emotional attachment to it, there's no comfort attached to it. It is simply a vehicle to derive revenue and hopefully have it be accretive over time so that you're getting the return, the yield that you get from the operations of the real estate, and also having it improve in value over time. And there are a lot of different asset classes in commercial real estate.
Okay.
I think a lot of people think of offices as commercial real estate, but commercial real estate is also comprised of retail buildings, industrial buildings, flex buildings that it can be either industrial or office.
Mm.
Multifamily buildings are in the commercial real estate sphere. So really, anything that is not a home that produces income, even though you don't usually think of agricultural land as being commercial real estate, that's sort of in a
Mhm.
category by itself, but everything else really falls in that commercial real estate. And why? It's more of a numerical consideration instead of, do I like the bathroom? Do I like the way this flows? Even though those kinds of things are important when you're buying an office building, it has to have a way for people to circulate well for it to be a successful office building or apartment building. But mostly people are looking at the ability to generate income, having a good income and expense ratio, and having a successful accretion and value over time.
So really what you're talking about then is commercial real estate is more a numbers investment game versus an emotional purchase game.
Correct.
Yeah, because
Absolutely.
when people buying a house, questions are often, did you fall in love with the house? You really, if you're an investor saying, I fell in love with this business, the question is, what's the ROI? What's the cap rate? What sort of financial metrics can I use to show that this is a viable investment for my portfolio?
And absolutely.
Yeah.
And there are also things like, what is the story about why this is going to increase in value? Is this an emerging market? Is there something changing here that I
Mhm.
can capitalize on by
Yeah.
being in the right place at the right time? One thing
No,
people always say about commercial real estate is you make your money when you buy. You
that's
you
right.
make money because you buy the right asset at the right time in the right market.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Even if you do residential rentals, it's always when you do the buy. The money is
Yeah.
always made at the buy, right? I have a lot of friends across the country who are attorneys, and maybe about a third of them own their own buildings. You know,
Yeah.
an attorney in a smaller town, and they own the building that they operate out of. Now, of course, those are two different businesses, right? You have the company that occupies the space, and then you have the building that is the space. and do they actually work together, right? And oftentimes they don't. Oftentimes they're separate, right? But that's
Right.
very interesting. It's interesting. My
Yeah.
firm actually looked into purchasing the building that we're in, but it's almost impossible to do in this area unless you have a whole bunch of investors, just because it's so expensive in Silicon Valley. I mean, land is just outrageously expensive, right?
It certainly is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying to help a person who wants to start a business by building a sport venue.
Okay.
And he has a business plan that he is committed to. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that his estimate of what the price per square foot of land or a building that he needs to acquire to start the building is just 50% of what the reality is.
Yeah. Well, if he's looking for a sports venue, my kids are in a I think I probably talked about this before. My kids are in a dance. One kid does dance and the other kid does taekwondo because, of course, they can't do the same thing. They have
Right.
to do different things. But just behind their studio, there's a cricket training center in just a warehouse, just a large, open, empty space. And I remember just taking a walk there one day while the kids were in class. And there were just these kids who were doing this training, bowling, I guess you call it when you throw the ball down the pitch. But it was just a big warehouse space, and certainly
Yeah.
they had laid out, fences and nets and things, but it was just
Mhm.
warehouse. I assume that with a
Yeah.
sports venue, he could do the same thing, just set it
Exactly.
up
But
set it up in an empty
unfortunately,
warehouse.
the cost of warehouses
Uh,
is
it's going
much
up.
more than you would think it is.
Uh-huh. Yeah, with the advent of online sales and the dominance of Amazon, at least in my city, in Milpitas, where we are, there's a whole bunch of warehouse space that was built, and it was all snatched up within a month of it being built. And now there are, I
Right.
think, 8 separate warehouses, huge warehouses. They're all
Yeah.
Amazon fulfillment centers, right? So they just
Right.
cars go out, cars go out, and cars go out. Yeah. It
Yeah,
does
and
mean,
there have been
however.
a lot of things that have cyclically driven demand for warehouse space. When I
Mm,
first moved to California in 2016, it was right when the legal recreational CBD was just being allowed, and
right.
that drove up the demand for warehouse
Mm,
space all
mhm.
over California.
Yeah. It's really
But it had
interesting.
to be only a specific sector because if it had a nationally chartered mortgage,
Mm,
the landlord couldn't rent to something that was not legal
that's
federally. So
right.
they had to find
Yeah.
only people who owned their spaces outright.
It's weird. I remember at my last firm where I was a partner, we moved. We had to move locations. And the reason why we moved locations is that the landlord quadrupled the rent. And the reason why he had done that is because Stanford had come out with Stanford University, or the medical school had come out with a Stanford healthcare plan. And so Stanford just started renting or buying so many commercial spaces around the Palo Alto is where Stanford's located, but they were
Mhm.
all the way from San Francisco all the way down to San Jose. They just started buying space because I think they got a
Yeah,
big grant and just started leasing and buying, and so commercial real estate just becomes super valuable.
yeah,
And the company that took the firm moved, and that's always a challenge and a half. But the company that took over the space paid 4 times what the law firm was paying at that time, and they were happy to do it. I think that they were a startup that basically had received their first round funding, and they were just spending money, right? Their job was just spend money as much as they could
yeah,
and allow for growth. So fine, but it's interesting when people say, "Hey, the cost of housing is crazy." The commercial real estate market sometimes goes crazy.
yeah.
So where do you see challenges in the commercial market now? Because you've been here for a while, you've been doing this for a long time. You probably have your finger on the pulse of a lot of these things. What sort of challenges do you see in the market now, in the commercial?
There's a lot of different moving parts that go into that, but interest rates went up quickly and they've come down a little bit.
Yeah,
Historically they are still at very low levels.
yeah,
There is a disconnect between the mortgages that commenced in 2018, 2019, 2020,
mhm,
And if you've got a mortgage at 3.6% in 2016, and it had a 5-year term, and it was due in 2021, right when interest rates started to go up, that could have been pretty hard to refinance because all of a sudden interest rates have jumped. So the value of your building goes down. So as interest rates go up, capitalization rates go down.
Yep.
Capitalization rate is the net operating income divided by the price, and that gives you a capitalization rate. So their interest rates and cap rates are inverse. And as
Right.
cap rates go up, prices go down.
Mhm.
So if you had a building that was worth $100 million or $10 million in 2016, and you got a 70% loan to value loan at a low interest rate, then in 2021, all of a sudden interest rates have jumped to 7%. And so the value of your property has dropped to $7 million. Now you've
Right.
got $7 million of debt that has to be repaid, and now the bank only wants to give you 5 million on a $7 million property. There's a two
Right.
million dollar gap.
Yeah.
So everybody thought that this is temporary. So a lot of what happened with people who were reliable operators with a good credit history was that the bank decided to just let them keep paying their interest rate, not call the loan in and say, if you don't pay now, we're going to foreclose.
Right.
Now we're at this point where nobody believes that interest rates are necessarily going to come down fast. And certainly, if they do come down more, they're not going to settle at the levels that they were at prior to
Yeah.
summer of 2021.
There's no way they're going to 3% ever again, or at least not within living memory. Yeah.
And so th- the challenges of refinancing properties that were financed when values were higher and interest rates were lower is that in order to refinance, you may actually have to put equity into your property to get a
You ha
new
you
mortgage and
you
pay
you
off
have
the old
you
one.
you have to pay down the mortgage, invest money so that you own more higher percentage of the property, and then they'll allow you to refinance at current market rates. Is that what you're saying?
Right. Right. A lower amount than you may have been able to take out against that property when values were higher. And so
That
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 can be really challenging.
Seems like a losing venture because, if the estimated value of property is based partially upon the interest rate, and the interest
Right.
rate goes up, so essentially what's happened is the person that's purchased the property at a lower interest rate is overpaid. They've artificially inflated the value of their property, but now they basically have to invest the difference in order to allow the bank to invest in the property anymore. Otherwise, the bank doesn't believe that it's a viable investment. That sounds like there's a big adjustment that's coming in the market.
There absolutely is. And it is exposure for banks, and there's exposure for individual investors and
Yeah,
private equity funds and real estate investment trusts. And that painful haircut has to be dealt with, and it's not going to
yeah,
feel good. And but I think we're at an inflection point where the market is no longer hoping that interest rates will settle back at 4%. So
right,
I think that this is a time where, cash rich investors that are have dry powder to deploy into a reset of prices will have a tremendous advantage, and some people who were levered at a level that seemed reasonable in an old interest rate environment will have to have some painful corrections.
that seems okay for large institutional investors, but nobody likes to take a hit.
No, no, it's
Nobody.
painful. Yeah.
I remember looking at there was a large university near me that had a very impressive endowment, billions, and they lost 10 to 20% of their endowment when the real estate crash happened because they were overinvested in one asset class.
Right.
I can imagine commercial real estate. So many companies don't want their books to, they don't want to look like their company is stressed in any way because otherwise
Right.
the banks won't loan to them.
Right.
Deutsche Bank is not going to invest in a company
And
that's
investors
stressed.
won't invest, put their limited partner equity
Right.
into their fund if they appear to be stressed.
Yeah.
Funds are loath to ask for capital calls from their limited partners to recapitalize an asset. They have to make a really compelling case for why values will, resume in the future, and it's going to make sense to put more capital in
Right.
to keep the building.
Can I please ask you to pull out your very robust crystal ball here and ask you how is commercial real estate performing compared to other similar assets, and where is that going to go?
Well, I am not a expert on bonds or an
Right.
expert on stocks. So comparing real estate to other asset classes is a little bit above my pay grade. So
It's
I'll
above
just,
mine too. It's above mine too, just so you know.
and a lot of other people's.
Yeah.
When I lived in New York, I would always think that these Wall Street people would focus on two or three stocks, and they'd research, and they'd still be wrong. And
Yeah.
so how is somebody who spends all their time thinking about real estate supposed to be able to make decisions about stocks? So I'll stick on real estate. And but as the market resets and finds a new balance, for example, dry powder wants to move, just like a magnet seeks its polar opposite.
Right.
It's dry powder. Capital wants to be deployed, and a
Right.
lot of capital has been sitting on the sidelines for a long time.
Yep.
And this repricing phenomena is just, magnetically pulling that capital in to be deployed. And so as that happens in the real estate market, people are buying buildings at reduced prices, whether they're reduced 10% or 15% or 40%, and there will be some of each. And there will be some things that never take a hit. There's categories that are just impervious to changes in retail, changes in work style. At the same time that capital is itching to redeploy in real estate, capital is eager to redeploy. Since we're talking about Silicon Valley, the funding market for a lot of science ventures has been very slow. And so a lot of companies haven't gotten any new funding for a while. But people are willing to take risk because the chance to get a high return, and things have been quiet for a while. That means those sources of capital are eager to go out and be deployed. And so that will start to reinvigorate offices, the demand for offices. There are some very large companies that are getting very hard lined about returning to work at big companies. So
Mm.
office has had a strange moment in the last 5 years, and it really doesn't have any context that I'm aware of in history. But there is this big shift in behavior. But I do believe that ultimately office is relevant. Some of it will be repurposed. But so we've had a lull in the economy that has encompassed funding new businesses and getting people into real estate. And I just think that engine is just starting back up, and that it's going to take off again. And this repricing is what's going to drive it in real estate.
Well, dramatic changes in any sort of market environment cause dramatic changes in pricing, right?
Yeah.
So whatever it is, a big draw in the market in one place will cause a lower draw in the market somewhere else. And so
Yeah.
it's just a
Right.
question of where people want to invest where their money is most efficient. And so I mean, it's wherever the efficiency is offered, right? Whatever sort of it, and it's almost amorphous. I mean, that concept doesn't mean a whole lot to someone who hasn't studied economics or somebody who hasn't observed it. I certainly didn't, but I can see it now as an attorney after 15 years of watching people's investments over time and watching the results of good planning and bad planning. This morning, I had a woman sitting in my office who had a house and a few $1,000s, but she needed to protect a family member, and we just had a long conversation about how do we do that. But then I have people who are in the office who say, "Hey, Elijah, I just bought my 17th rental property. Let's go ahead and do whatever we need to do with all of the tools that we've already set up to protect ourselves." And it's just a question of where people put their effort and their money. There's no good, there's no bad, it just is.
Right.
Um, I have a question for you. Let's bring this to little side of my side of the street, okay, which is
Okay.
trust issues.
Mhm.
And I know that people who own commercial real estate, in my world, they're looking at how to transfer, how to control, what do you do? What are some strategies or considerations or scenarios that you've seen that have been really successful when we're talking about succession? Succession meaning transferring something from one person to another. Of course, that might be an inheritance, it might be a gift, it might be a sale, it might be a transfer. What are some things for succession that you have seen for people to really consider, for considerations and scenarios that they might want to think about?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, one thing that a lot of people find out is that if they sell their real estate, they have to pay capital gains tax. And so
Mhm.
they think, I'll pass it on to my children. And then the basis will be stepped up and it can be appraised at that time. What I've seen is that families that have inherited portfolios of real estate or even just a single or a couple of assets, that the checks are being distributed and everybody, gets used to getting this check every month. And one person will move to one part of the world, another one will move someplace else. And the sort of friendship of the family becomes stressed out when the person who maybe is paying the most attention or managing the asset feels that they should have some kind of compensation for the attention and work that they do to keep it efficient. And
Mhm.
sometimes other family members don't trust the more active person, and so there are stalemates that lead to heartbreaking family schisms that nobody wants to have. So thinking about who and how the property will be managed in the succession plan. Some people may, not be very interested in operating real estate. They want to be a doctor, they want to go surfing or something like that. And so if that is the case, then who is running the real estate? Is
Mhm.
there a property manager? Is it properly insured? Is somebody looking at the capital expenditures like replacing the roof or the elevator or things like that when they should be? And is the person who's managing it actually doing a great job? And
Mhm.
so, how to know whether a property manager is charging reasonable rates for their services and whether they're optimizing the building, whether the rents are at the highest level they can be, whether the expense ratio, I mean, do they have relationships with the vendors who fix things and provide materials to maintain the building? Are they getting the best possible rates from those people? How do you find some benchmarks out there to determine whether your building is optimized and being
Mhm.
efficient? And for people who aren't knowledgeable and don't really want to spend the energy to become super knowledgeable, I think that's a really challenging thing to do. And, there are asset managers that will take on the role of optimizing your asset and, giving you a sort of lens of what could be better, what you need to plan for in the future.
Mhm.
Because let's say you got a check for $5,000 every month. And all of a sudden, there's a $2 million expense that in order to plan for that, you need to start putting reserves away. So if there are 10 people getting $5,000 and all of a sudden, we know that this should really be replaced in 2 years, that means we're going to have to take 2,000 out of your $5,000 check and start putting it in a reserve fund so that we can pay for this.
Yep.
The person who has been receiving that check is not going to be comfortable because let's face it, so those are the kinds of considerations that I think don't always get thought out really clearly. And, of course, everybody wants to keep their family happy and peaceful and trusting each other. And then also, you also don't want to let your property fall into the hands of people who purposely or unintentionally mismanage your property. And like, I know that I've seen property managers that just kept on collecting their fee and, kept the proceeds going out to the owners of the property. But meanwhile, the condition of the property just fell into greater and greater disrepair or deferred maintenance. And then ultimately, the value of the property is severely diminished and now you've got a distressed sale, and that isn't the optimal performance of what the
So,
property
so
could be.
if I could rephrase what you said, there are four considerations. One of them are family relationships, and the other three are really the fact that you're running a business.
Yeah,
So the parents invested in this commercial real estate. And the only one that has to do with the family relationships is about control and who wants to be involved, right?
right.
They have control issues. Obviously, if the commercial real estate is held in some sort of an entity like an LLC or a corporation, then the children can receive that entity and then they have control. But do they want to work together? Who's going to manage the business? Who's going to operate the business? How do you make sure that the people that you hire to operate the business still do the job?
Yeah,
Because
right.
there's lots of real estate management companies, but they got bought and sold too. And there
Mhm.
are key people there that leave as well. And sometimes those businesses are well run one year and then the next year they're not.
Exactly.
So I think with any sort of investment that you receive, if it's its ongoing business, meaning someone is paying for a good or service, and that's what commercial
Mhm.
real estate is. In fact, that's what rental real estate is. It's an ongoing business.
Yeah,
If there's an ongoing business, there are really three issues that families have to deal with, at least from my perspective, and you have a lot more. But from my perspective, they have to deal with the fact of that there's control issues. Who is going to control it? Number two, the person who is actually operating the business should be paid for their time and effort because it's valuable, right? They're using their time and it's not that they're investing it and, oh, you should do this because mom would have wanted you to. So I don't have to pay someone, right? Because if that person wasn't there, you had to pay someone to do it. So you might as well just pay
right.
someone. And then the final thing is that there's all these investment questions about operating an ongoing business. They have to
Right.
make sure that someone's answering them. And you said, what if someone wants to be a doctor? What if someone wants to do some sort of other business? And in my experience, I don't want to be disrespectful to doctors anyway, because some doctors are fantastic. I have many of doctors who are clients, but I also know many doctors who make really bad investments because they have one misunderstanding, just one. The misunderstanding is because I'm really smart, because I'm the top of my field in this one thing, this one very small, infinitesimally focused thing, that same level of operational excellence applies everywhere else in my life.
Yeah.
And I've seen that happen with high-end engineers. I've seen it happen with lawyers. I've seen it happen with accountants. I've seen it happen with real estate agents. I've seen it happen with everyone. Someone
Yeah.
who's at the top of their game, they think that because I'm good at X, I must be good at Z too.
Yeah.
And I know for me, I am not that special. I
Yeah.
know I'm not. I am not. I pay people to do my investments. I pay people to do with real estate. I pay people to deal with accounting. I am not that good.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's an effect called the Keebler-Dunning effect, I think it is. And two economists won the Nobel Prize for explaining why people who, when they first approach some new task or project or problem, why people, when they have 2 or 3 hours of research, why they think that they are so good at doing something that people still struggle at who have been doing it for 30 years. Somebody's like you've been doing commercial real estate for years. You say, hey, there's still things to learn. I learn things all the time. And you have a really good perspective and you're really humble about it. But then someone comes forward and they read 2 articles and they think, I can do this. And they have this fantastic explanation about saying that people have unearned optimism. They
Yeah.
haven't earned the right to know why something should be good. They are simply guessing, but then they learn that there are problems. And then when they learn that there are problems, oftentimes some people just go and find a new problem, right? So they don't solve the
Yeah.
one that they have, they just go find a new one and then have this unearned optimism and then find a problem, then go find a new problem, right? So
To be
yeah,
unearnedly optimistic about that instead.
yeah, yeah. Well, Carol, it's wonderful to talk to you. I really enjoy we have monthly networking meetings, just for anybody who knows, where Carol does a segment about diversity because we are in a group that focuses on cultural diversity. So she does a segment on diversity. I really enjoy those. Carol, if people are looking to find you, your information is going to be in the show notes, but why don't you just give a plug for where they can find you? Go ahead.
Sure, absolutely. The name of my company is IPGSF. It stands for Innovation Properties Group in San Francisco. And
Mhm.
that IPGSF.com. Go to our website. You can find me there.
Okay. Something that was very interesting to me about commercial real estate agents is that you don't just deal with owners, you also deal with renters, right? So you
Yep.
might be hired by a company or somebody that's looking to lease space, but in an individual rental environment, the real estate agent is generally not involved in rentals. So take us through the process. If someone's looking for space, what's the process that you go through to help them find the right space for them?
There are definitely commercial real estate brokers who focus on representing landlords, and there are
Mhm.
commercial real estate brokers who focus on representing tenants.
Which one are you?
So, more on the tenant
Okay.
representation side.
Okay.
So if somebody contacts me and says, I need an office and we are a startup, we need these specific parts for our business. I'm just going to take a example of a science company. We need a laboratory, we need offices, we need conference rooms. Right now we have 6 people, but we think we're going to have 20 people in 24 months.
That's a big
So
growth.
that is the big growth, and when people get big funding. And so what we have to help them realize in the beginning is that even though you only have 6 people now and you're going to have 20 people later on, you don't want to take a space in one building and move in 6 months and then
Yeah.
move in 6 months as you
Mm.
grow.
Yeah.
You also aren't going to get somebody to say, okay, well, I'll hang on to this space that's peripheral to your first office, and then you can take over the next one and the next one, and everything's just going to sit still while you get ready. But
It would.
what we can do is we can say, you've got something the landlord wants. You've got a big funding runway that, is visible. You're already a company that, has customers or whatever it is that you already have. And we know we can negotiate because there's either a lot of space on the market or there's very little space on the market. We can play to the strengths of the market and negotiate the best way to phase in your rent so that you're not paying for everything right now. We can kind of say you're going to get this, but if you get this, you're not going to get this. And so, what makes sense to you for the longest term of the property? Because right
Yeah.
now, there's a lot of space available. So, but if the market recovers in 3 years and you have, boxed yourself into something too small, and then you have to negotiate a new lease when the market is strong, that's going to cost you a lot of money.
Yeah, it'll be
So
really
even
expensive.
though you can take like a subletted space for somebody who's desperate to get rid of it right now, that means when you're like really going strong in 3 years, you're going to be at a brand new market and having to renegotiate when the
Yeah.
market's much stronger. So it'd be better taking
Yeah.
a space directly from a landlord now and committing to 5 years
Mhm.
instead of. So those are the kinds of things we help people
That's interesting.
negotiate.
So we actually at my office, we actually needed additional space, not for workspace, but we needed storage space. And
Yeah.
so we have a storage unit nearby, but we were looking to expand it. It was just really inconvenient. And there's a whole bunch of empty suites that weren't really
Uh-huh.
built out. They
Yeah.
were built out by the prior tenants and they weren't really good. So we just contacted the landlord and said, "Hey, will you accept a really low rate for this space here as long as we have our lease?" And sure, we just tacked it on. So we did kind of the same thing that you did, which
Yeah.
is ignorantly so to say, "Hey, there's a whole bunch of empty space. Can you just tack this on?" So now we have this storage unit. We can kind of use it for what we want. So we kind of set
Uh-huh.
up a studio in there, which is nice, a film
Yeah.
studio. So that was
Oh,
good.
cool.
Well, Carol, it's been wonderful to talk to you. I really appreciate your insight. I appreciate your time today. Any final things that you'd like to say to our audience before we close up?
Real estate is one of the greatest vehicles for wealth creation. So don't lose heart. Things are, a little difficult in this current environment, but don't lose faith in real estate because it's more common generational wealth builder than any other asset class.
Yeah. Well, it's an asset class that grows. Real estate, commercial or residential, is an asset class that grows with inflation, and oftentimes in a economy like California or certain parts of California, it grows faster than inflation. But it also cash flows, and so if it cash flows to pay its own expenses, and the value of the asset grows over time, then it's a great investment. It really is down to what you said before. It really is that you must purchase that you make the money at the purchase. So you have to be a really savvy buyer or you have to inherit a great property. And in that case, good for you. Yeah. I have a lot of people like that, a lot of clients like that. So that's great. Well, this
Yeah.
has been the Keys to Your Legacy. Thank you so much for watching. If you stuck with it this far, would you please like and subscribe? Subscribing to our channel really helps us out a lot, and we really appreciate that. Share this video with somebody who you think could learn a little bit about commercial real estate. It is really exciting when you get into it, but at the outside, it's kind of amorphous. It's hard to understand the inner workings. I'm Elijah Keys. Really appreciate your time, and we'll see you soon.
You've been tuning into The Keys to Your Legacy with your host, Elijah Keys. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, keyslawgroup.com. Thank you for your positive